elections have consequences, right? We just heard President Trump at Davos calling out Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, from stage, talking about how debanking needs to stop. And, I give kudos to Sam Brownback, because if it weren't for him standing up to JP Morgan Chase when his group, the National Committee for Religious Freedom, was debanked, we wouldn't be here today where JP Morgan now is backing away from some of those initiatives.
Well, it is my pleasure to be joined today by Derek Kreifels. He is the CEO of Prospr Aligned, which is a brand new organization that just launched in January. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how you came from serving as the head of the State Financial Officers Foundation to then kind of closing that chapter and jumping into this new organization called Prospr Aligned. Share a little bit about that decision and what you all do.
Yeah, well, thank you, Virginia, first of all, for having me here at the Daily Signal. We, have had the opportunity to be a voice to your viewers and readers over the years in the conservative movement. So we really appreciate the work that y'all do here. Working with the state officials, state financial officers around the country was a dream job. It was a 12-year commitment to
12 years.
Really just, serving these men and women who stepped up and, put their political necks on the line to do what was right and to lead. And, as the last few years evolved, we definitely got more involved, during the Biden years into ESG, anti-ESG and DEI and all of those issues. And one of the things, as I was traveling around and I would speak at different meetings and different groups, I would talk about is, we need more private sector solutions. In other words, we need more companies to start and help providing solutions for some of these state government pension funds that were being weaponized. And so some folks started putting their heads together, and they came to me and said, we want you to be the CEO of this new company called Prospr Aligned. And what was fun about it for me was it was really a continuation of some of the work that I did at SFOF, and now get to help institutional investors across the country make sure that their assets are being managed in a way that is actually aligned with their values. It's kind of, it seems like a simple thought, but you would be surprised how many investors are not aware of how asset managers are voting their shares. And that's really what we are laser focused on.
And you all refer to that as values alignment.
Yes.
And that's something that you really specialize in. If you would just kind of give a little bit more of like practical examples of if you're going in and consulting with a client, how do you go about making sure that where their money is going also aligns with their values?
Well, full disclosure, Heritage is not a client of Prospr Aligned, but Heritage Foundation is a great example where you all are choosing to make sure that your assets are now being activated during shareholder season. Companies like IBM, Citi, CVS, Airbnb, that Heritage announced recently that they are pushing back on those publicly traded companies for different political issues where they had direct ownership of some of those assets. And what the companies were doing and some of the proposals they were voting on were complete misalignment to Heritage's core values. We all know Heritage Foundation, what all the different issues that y'all represent. And I always call you the firewall for the nation's conservative movement. If we lose Heritage, we all lose. Like it is truly is that. So it's awesome to see Heritage Foundation start pushing back in that way and creating their own shareholder proposals, becoming an activist shareholder to say, hey, we're tired of you publicly traded company Alphabet or Airbnb pushing against Israel or pushing against, promoting DEI initiatives or pushing a pro-abortion drug at your drugstore. And so that's what we do is we go into a company or to a government entity and we say, let us look under the hood of your assets. We shine light. Light is a great disinfectant, right? Yeah. So to bring transparency to how asset managers' behavior is not only at shareholder season, but also frankly, some of the coalitions that they join, whether they're part of this, like Climate Action 100, or they might be part of some other coalition that is working nefariously against the core values or the core economic engine of a state government, like oil and gas, for example. And so that's why we're called Prospr Aligned. The hope is that we can bring some alignment. And we do that in a way that's very confidential and quiet, so that we can help them fix the problems that they have without creating any kind of embarrassing situation or.
Yeah, that's critical.
So,
That's critical. Doing the homework.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you have a long resume of working in this field. We've talked a little bit about it already, but you also served as the assistant state treasurer in Kansas.
Yeah.
Share, if you would, a little bit about how that experience influenced your own approach to investing.
Yeah, that's a great question. My boss, who I'll plug, Ron Estes, was a great man, was state treasurer. I was his deputy and chief of staff. He now serves in Congress from the Wichita, Kansas area, serves on Ways and Means. He's a great leader. And so it was easy working for a great leader, right? When you have great leadership, everybody involved in the organization is on board and going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And so watching him make decisions, he was one of the early leaders, though, that would start to talk about some of this social investing and say, look, the pendulum is going one way. We're going to go, we're going to divest from countries like Iran or Venezuela or whatever. And, he said, now watch, because it's going to go back the other way, and they're going to start, others are going to start calling for divestment of Israel. And so he kind of saw the writing on the wall really early on. And I think, as time went on, it became clearer that, especially after the Biden administration came into office, that the conservatives were a decade at least behind the eight ball in terms of realizing how organized the left had gotten to making sure that they could weaponize the investment process of a lot of institutional investors by proposing these proposals on, DEI and ESG and LGBTQ rights and all these other, social issues that should be discussed. And I think my boss agreed with me on this, and still does to this day. Those issues should be discussed in the halls of Congress across the street, not in a boardroom or at a publicly traded company shareholder meeting.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to retirees' benefits, right? Like, it's not fair to the hardworking fireman or police officer whose pension they've worked their entire life for, and they're really counting on to be there when they're ready to retire. And some group is playing politics with it.
Yeah.
And so I think, he was always a very kind of pragmatic, reasonable thinker, leader. And I think I got that from him. But the whole environment changed after he left and went to Congress. And so we had to become more of a fighter.
Yeah.
Well,
that gets into the issue a little bit of debanking, and another kind of looking at, all right, where we've seen conservatives kind of be pushed out of that space because they won't get in lockstep with whatever the DEI or that woke initiative is. Obviously, that was this example with saying Sam Brownback as well.
Yeah, and it is a great example. I love elections have consequences, right? We just heard President Trump at Davos calling out Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, from stage, as he does.
It was a wild moment.
Talking about how debanking needs to stop. And, I give kudos to Sam Brownback, the former ambassador for religious freedom, former U.S. Senator, governor of Kansas, because if it weren't for him standing up to J.P. Morgan Chase when his group, the National Committee for Religious Freedom, was debanked, we wouldn't be here today, where J.P. Morgan now is backing away from some of those initiatives. I use this example that when I'm talking to a group of institutional investors, especially in the faith community, about Sam Brownback, most of them are appalled to hear, that J.P. Morgan Chase would, debank, somebody like Sam Brownback or a group that he was involved with. But the problem is most of those institutional investors, later, his work would lead to a gentleman named David Bahnsen, who had his own proposal to help to try to push JP Morgan from stopping the practice of debanking. Mm. And that proposal only got 2% of the vote by shareholders that were involved in that shareholder vote.
Wow.
So that means that in a room like that, on average, about 98% probability that 98% of those folks voted against the proposal that would have helped stop debanking, and voted against Sam Brownback.
Interesting.
And so that's the huge education gap that we're having, like in issues like debanking and all these other issues, is investors aren't even aware that they're voting either in favor of a bad thing or against a good measure. And that's where we come in.
Yeah, really, really critical.
Yeah.
I think there's, I feel like there's an evolution that has happened a little bit as things have gotten really wild and kind of crazy in some ways on this investment side. And the left has been pushing so hard with this ideology. I want to read a quote here from yourself. You, in the past, have said, investment decisions should prioritize financial returns and long-term stability over political and activist agenda. What caused you to kind of move away from that approach in investing a little bit to some extent?
Well, I think most of what the moving away from an agenda, I've always said that fiduciary duty should be the rule, right? Yeah. I've served as a trustee on a state pension board. I've seen those decisions be made. I would amend that quote though to say that that just like there's news here recently that Oklahoma Treasurer Todd Russ.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that.
He's the first red state to use his own investment funds that he has direct oversight of to push back on a few companies that he believes are doing wrong. Yeah. So, I think most of the time when a conservative says, we want you to stop doing something, the left or the fake news, the fake media will instantly say that you're being super right-wing, super conservative, when really what we're asking for is kind of neutrality. Mm-hmm. We started this whole back and forth with just asking for banks to be banks, asset managers to be asset managers, and to stay out of the politics. But that hasn't been what's happened. And the left has really pushed to such an extreme that now it is going to take some activism on some of these institutional investors' part to come back and push back to neutral.
Yeah. I think that's critical because you can't, it's a pretty big weed. Yeah. And maybe multiple to really pull out of these leftist companies.
We're starting to see, the story that I think was in Bloomberg recently, the story about Todd Russ, multiple institutional investors. And I think they mentioned Heritage Foundation, the National Center for Public Policy Research, and a couple other organizations. But you're starting to see conservative groups wake up to this. And there's a lot of really smart people that are much smarter than me that are helping with a lot of these proposals. And they're doing great work.
I want to get back a little bit to your resume, if you don't mind.
Sure,
so while you were at State Financial Officers Foundation and heading there, you launched the Public Fiduciary Network with over $3 trillion in assets. How exactly did that initiative inform the work? Has it already, and will it continue to at Prospr Aligned?
Yeah, well, we realized that a lot of our state officials served as fiduciaries on their pension funds or other state investment funds of some kind, like in Texas, the Permanent School Fund. It was like a $80 billion oil and gas royalty fund that helps support public education in Texas. Yeah. Those individuals weren't statewide elected officials that were serving as state financial officers, but our state financial officers really had an interest in connecting with those other board members and helping educate them on some of these ESG and DEI issues, so that when they had their semi-monthly or monthly pension meetings, they would be well informed and educated and had material to help them ask the right questions as a fiduciary on these huge funds. And so we launched that initiative in spring of 24, I guess. So just last year, had our first in-person gathering, had several of the state officials were there that were on, but we also got some folks who were representatives from blue states that were equally appalled and shocked and offended that their teachers union pension funds were being weaponized in a way politically that they shouldn't be. Yeah. Even if they agreed with the political issue at hand, the fact that they were leveraging these beneficiaries' retirement dollars was offensive. So, I think at that one of those first meetings, we had a representative from, probably 3 or 4 different blue states. And we treated that with discretion because we knew that, they go back to the blue state and they, say, hey, we were at the Public Fiduciary Network event that SFOF hosted. It would be a problem for some of them. But some of them have, many of these pension boards are appointed by maybe the governor and then by maybe a minority leader in the Senate. Okay. And so that's how we were able to get some cross-pollination philosophically and from some of the blue and purple states to participate in it.
It's no easy task.
No, it's not.
It's a big deal. Yeah. Now, you all offer something called voting called voting consulting. Yeah. If you would talk a little bit about just what that is, the proxy voting consulting, how it operates, and how folks can take advantage of it.
That's right. So part of our corporate engagement program at Prospr Aligned, we can help somebody that wants to be an activist shareholder like Todd Russ. We can help make sure that the back and forth between the publicly traded company and the SEC and all the filings, everything are correct and meet the deadlines they need. But we can also just help someone understand how their shares are being voted. So proxy consulting for us really is again, that transparency light. We're going in and showing you how your asset managers are actually voting on all of those different proposals, thousands of proposals every shareholder season. Wow. We've got all of the folks on our team that can do that. And so that's what we do a lot. And when I talk about going under the hood and kind of looking at that, that's kind of where it starts is like, let's see how your assets were voted maybe last year or the year before. Maybe we do a 3 or 4 year kind of look back. Because some asset managers have evolved and changed over time and maybe didn't vote as wildly pro ESG, for example, in 24 that they maybe did in 21, 22, or 23. And so we give them that view and then arm that state official or that board with the data. And then they can go and make the decisions. And sometimes, and we haven't talked about this, the proxy advisory services, ISS and Glass Lewis, they've got 90% of the market share. They do a lot of advising in proxy voting. They make a lot of statements about the guidelines that they're going to be using. And sometimes we can check that out too and make sure that what ISS or Glass Lewis is telling an institutional investor they're advising on their votes to the asset manager, we can double check that and make sure that everybody's being honest.
Yeah, critical.
So
when you look at whether conservative or moderate or those that don't have any sort of kind of political sway one way or another, other folks that are kind of doing this in the industry, what would you say separates Prospr Aligned from any other consultants?
I'm not aware of anybody else that does what we do.
That's awesome.
Which is a good place to be in.
It is.
We definitely have a wind in our sail with the new administration and the statements and the executive orders that have come out against DEI and against ESG and some of this other stuff. So we really are, for a long time in the institutional investment space, there were a lot of opportunities for blue states to have their voice heard. CalPERS, ILPERS, other states have been really activist pension funds. The red states and the more conservative institutional investors, clients, religious organizations, they've been left out of the table. We're bringing them to the table for the first time to really empower them, give them their voice, because for years we've known this is a problem, and the point of view that a lot of our organizations have has sadly been left out. And so we're bringing that back.
Yeah, so critical. Yeah. So what does the future hold? You all have just launched at the beginning of the year. What are your sights set on for this year?
I mean, it's an adventure, working with, talking with multiple states. We hope to have several announcements later in the year, working with different state funds, different elected officials, appointed officials, and not just states, hopefully some cities and county governments as well. We are talking to a lot of groups and foundations in the conservative movement that we want to help, and they're really just helping the entire industry see that there needs to be we need to create a seat at the table for that red state / conservative point of view. Our goal is, with a state official, we go in with a whiteboard and say, what do you need to meet your goal? Like, how can we help you? And, really at the end of the day, we want to make them the hero, right? Like I'm okay if we're never mentioned in a story about what they're doing. At the end of the day, we're making that elected official, that appointed official, or whoever is responsible and in charge of those beneficiaries' dollars, we're making them the hero.
Yeah. So, for any state officials, local officials who are listening, or maybe staff members who work for those folks, if they want to get involved, if they want to learn more, how do they do that?
Yeah, they can go to prosperaligned.com and reach out to us. We are flying around the country speaking about it, and so happy to. I'm on LinkedIn personally, and always welcome the private messaging and get a lot of those these days. So
excellent. Well, Derek, thank you, and thanks for the work you guys are doing. Your willingness to share it here today, and we're really excited here at the Daily Signal to watch the work of Prospr Aligned unfold this year. It's an exciting
Virginia,
year.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Of course, our pleasure.
Subscribe to get the news the legacy media won't tell you and only the Daily Signal can bring to you.